Good day, everyone. So today we will be presenting to you Acuna's Philosophical Analysis, Unit 1, Modules 1 to 4. We hope that this unit will provide you foundational information on critical thinking ideas and principles that will aid in comprehending a more complex and advanced issues. Let's start with Module 1, Words and Concept. By the end of this module, we will be able to distinguish between a word and a concept, explain how concepts are formed, and lastly, to distinguish between simple and complex terms. We'll start with the first objective, which is to be able to distinguish between a word and a concept. We all know that word is the most austere unit of communication, since it is the necessary means of communication. There are no ideas without words, no assertion of knowledge claims without concepts, and no arguments without knowledge claims. Remember that concepts and words are not the same thing because concepts are made up of ideas while words are made up of letters. Again, concepts and words are not the same because concepts are made up of ideas while words are made up of letters. Although a word can be used as a sign of a concept. A word can be used as a sign of concept. Moving on to the second objective, which is on how concepts are formed. All things that exist in the word are particulars, and these particulars are sometimes difficult to name individually. So what we do is find a common characteristic through abstraction to form a general idea or concept. The name used to express this concept or idea is a general term. To give you a better idea, given that you have a bowl full of pepper. Now, let's imagine naming every grain of pepper in that bowl. Is that even possible? I think your answer will be no. This is because every grain is impossible to be named. We have a common characteristic to every grain, and this common characteristic forms the general idea or a concept. As you can see, they are all black in color. The term used now to refer to that pepper is black pepper. But what is a term? Terms are used to express what we know and are made up of letters. Terms are used to express what we know and made up of letters. There are two types of terms, which are simple and complex. Simple terms are made up of single words, while complex terms are made up of several words. Examples of simple terms include laptop, chair, cabinet, and phone. Examples of complex terms are the Asia songbird and the 40th Vice President of the Philippines. We have now discussed and we were able to answer all three objectives. We hope that everything was clear and understood. If so, let us now move on to the second module.
Let's now go on to Module 2, Intention and Extension of Concepts. Here are the objectives that we wish to answer for this module. Number 1, analyze concepts in terms of extension and intention. Number 2, distinguish intention in terms of either essential property or family resemblance. And lastly, to number 3, discuss the significance of Wittgenstein's example of the concept games. For our first objective, we will first define extension and intention. Extension refers to the things that are members of the domain or class of the concept. They are the things to which the concept applies. An intention, on the other hand, is specifying the trait, characteristics, or functions shared by the members. For example, we have the concept of dogs. The intention or characteristics of dogs include it barks, it has a tail, and fur. Its extension includes poodle, shih tzu, and pomeranian. Now let's distinguish intention in terms of either essential property or family resemblance. In the example of mammals, its intention includes mammary glands, hair and fur, and diaphragm. And its extension includes whales, humans, and cats. Notice that there is one trait that is common to all the members of the extension, and that is the mammary gland. This is what we call the essential property, which is defined as one trait that applies to all members of the extension. It is a trait that is enough to say that an extension is qualified to be under the concept. Now let's discuss our second and third objective. Essentialism states that for a concept to be meaningful, there has to be an essential property held common by all members. However, Wittgenstein believed the opposite of the essentialist view. He challenged this by using his example of games. Consider the number of different games we have, such as board games, ball games, card games, and many more. Do you notice one characteristic common to all these games? Perhaps not. And Wittgenstein says the same. By looking at these games, we will not see anything common, but only a network of similarities overlapping and crisscrossing, to which he referred to as family resemblance. Remember that not all concepts have an essential property, but rather most only have a family resemblance or similarities. For example, the concept of culture. In Southeast Asia, different countries have different cultures. But if we are going to look at it, there are little to no common traits for every country, but it has a lot of similarities. For example, countries in Southeast Asia share similar language, and this is seen in Filipinos and Indonesians. Aku for Indonesians and ako for Filipinos both mean me and I. Lalaki means male in Indonesian, while Filipinos use lalaki. Bangsa is used to refer to a nation in Indonesian, while Filipinos use bansa. We have now finished discussing the extension and intension of concepts.
In this module, we are tasked to answer 4 objectives. First is to describe how a word acquires meaning, distinguish ambiguous and vague concepts, avoid useless controversies, and lastly, to apply a cardinal rule in critical thinking. The meaning of a word, according to philosophers, is acquired through the way in which people of the same verbal community use it. However, according to Wittgenstein, the meaning of a word is its use in the language. Wittgenstein's theory of meaning in terms of use indicates that there are several use of words, including asking a question, a person's name, asking for location, complimenting someone, and explaining an issue or a problem to a person. All of these are significant. In simpler terms, he meant that actual uses of the word in different contexts. According to him, philosophers keep on using artificial meaning of terms in which he is against of. This artificial use of terms are created for only specific purpose and are not meant to be used in real-life linguistic contexts. But how do we really identify the meaning of a word? Wittgenstein suggests one must first understand how it is used in a specific language game. This is because a word can have 2 or more meanings depending on how it is used, and some may have different meanings depending on the language spoken. To give you a better understanding, here are a few examples. First, the word bark. It can either mean dog's bark or a tree's bark. Another is the word date, which can mean a day in a month or a year, or a romantic or special occasion of getting together. Moving on to the next objective, which is to distinguish ambiguous and vague concepts. When words are used in several language games in a similar manner, it is referred to as its conventional or standard use. For example, the word mother, which is to refer to a female parent, is used almost the same way in every language game. Similarly to the word father, which refers to the male parent. However, words with standard uses are sometimes given different uses in other language game. When this happens, it becomes ambiguous. One example is the word chair. In different contexts, this word is used differently. In one context, it may mean a seat, and for another, it may mean a person in charge. Another example is the word duck, which can either mean to bend or refer to an animal. Lastly, we have the word hand, which used to refer to a body part, a helping hand, an act of passing something to another person, and the pointers in a clock to indicate time. On the other hand, when words are used so carelessly and are not clearly understandable, it becomes vague. To give you an example, words such as good, bad, small, and big are used vaguely. This is because people often use this word to describe something, but it does not give a distinct or precise description of what you are trying to say. For our third and fourth objective, when we use terms ambiguously or vaguely, we are prone to having misunderstandings. For instance, we may have experienced talking to our friend about a certain topic and you were asked, "Do you have a match?" You may have misunderstood it as your friend are asking, "Do you have a posporo?" When she really meant is to ask you if you have a competition for a game. As we can see, both used the word match but meant it in a complete different ways. This is where the cardinal rules take place. Cardinal rule states to never take part in any discussion unless you are sure that both parties are using the same words the same way. This is to avoid misunderstanding or useless controversies. So the next time you talk to someone and you both use the same word, make sure to ask them if they meant it the same way as you understood it. Module 3 is now done. We hope that you apply the cardinal rule whenever you have a conversation.
For our last module, Module 4, Classification of Concept. In this module, we will be answering the following objectives. Number 1, distinguish the 7 main categories of concept. Number 2, apply the technique for classifying concepts. And number 3, apply the intra- and intersubjectivity tests. Now distinguish the 7 main categories of concept. First is the empirical concept. This is when members of a concept's extension can be seen in the world in such a way that they are palpable and observable, implying that they exist in space and time. Example of this is your hairbrush, your bag, or your pillow. Second, we have the theoretical concept, where entities can be easily perceived to exist in space and time by the unaided senses and are only detectable with the use of sensory expanding equipment. We have two types of sensory extending devices, the radio telescope and the microscope or electron microscope. Radio telescope can help you observe the macro universe, while a microscope or electron microscope would help you observe the micro universe. Nevertheless, the existence of these concepts are necessary for scientific theory to be functional and to generate research. Third, the dispositional concepts. These concepts are those that do not specify a specific trait or characteristic that members must possess. However, they do display visible characteristics in particular processes, such as magnetic and elastic properties. Another example of this is temperature. Just by physically looking at someone or looking at a thing, you wouldn't know its actual temperature, for you need to use a thermometer to find out. Fourth, the analytic concepts, wherein the entities do not exist in the real world. They are neither visible nor tangible. They are conceptual creations created by our thoughts, such as the notion of a circle. A circle is mathematically defined as the set of infinite points equidistant from the center. However, this trait is not observable and cannot be found in the real world. These are entities that only subsist in our minds. To add, we often encounter analytic concepts in formal sciences like logic, mathematics, and geometry. Fifth is evaluative concepts, where value assessments about a person, act, behavior, event, or place. They cover a wide range of topics including moral, good or bad, right or wrong, aesthetic, ugly or beautiful, and religious beliefs like heaven and hell. Sixth is the fictitious concepts. These concepts are totally fictitious or imaginary, such as mermaids, unicorns, and Santa Claus. Ghost, witches, white lady, manananggal, and encanto are just a few examples of fictitious concepts that people often mistook as an empirical concept because they believe that they exist, even if they are just an imagination of our brains. Lastly, we have the metaphysical concept that most philosophical systems place at the core. The substance of God, mind, matter, and absolute are all examples of this. Moving on to the second and third objective for this module, which is to apply the technique for classifying concepts and apply the intra- and intersubjectivity tests. Intra-intersubjectivity tests are used to determine the type of concept. For a concept to be empirical, it must pass both inter- and intrasubjectivity tests. It must be visible and tangible to yourself and to another person. A concept is fictitious if it does not pass both the intra- and intersubjectivity test. For theoretical concepts, the belief of existence is established through the inter- and intrasubjective consensus of scientists. For example, empirical concepts include hairpins. This is because it passes both the inter- and intrasubjectivity test, wherein I can see and touch it, as well as the people around me. Fictitious concepts include fairy tales and tooth fairies, as these are only imaginary. Theoretical concepts can include sperm cells, bacteria, stars, and moon. And that brings us to the end of this report.
Do you want a summary of what we discussed? Here's a quick recap of all the things that we have learned today. For Module 1, Words and Concept, we learned that a concept is made up of ideas, while words are made up of letters. All things that exist in the world are called particulars. Because it is sometimes difficult to name each of the particulars, we find a common characteristic to find a general idea or concept. The name used to refer to the idea is the general term. Terms are used to express an idea, and it has two types: the simple term, which is made up of a single word, and the complex term, which is made up of two or more words.
For Module 2, Intension and Extension of Concepts, we learned that an extension are the things to which the concept applies, while the intention is specifying the trait or characteristics of the concept. The essential property is the one trait common to all members of the extension. However, not all concepts have an essential property, but only family resemblance or the network of similarities that overlaps and crisscross one another.
Moving on to Module 3, Using the Same Language. To identify the meaning of a word, we must determine how it is used in a specific language game. When words are used the same way, it is conventional or standard use of term. When it gains different meaning, the term becomes ambiguous. And when the word are used carelessly, it becomes vague. When conversing with someone, remember the cardinal rule, which states to never take part in any discussion unless you are sure that you are using the same word the same way.
And finally, the last module which talk about the 7 classifications of concepts. Number 1, empirical concept is when the extension is observable and exists in space and time. Number 2, theoretical concept where entities cannot be observed by the unaided senses and without the use of sensory extending devices. Number 3, dispositional concept, which refers to those that do not exhibit visible characteristics unless certain processes have been made. Number 4, analytic concepts, where entities are not visible nor tangible and do not exist in the real world. Number 5, evaluative concepts, which are assessments on behavior, act, person, event, or place. Number 6, fictitious concepts, which are only creations of our thoughts and are totally imaginary. And number 7, metaphysical concepts are mostly placed at the core of philosophy. To quickly and easily identify the concept, use the intra- and intersubjectivity test. A concept is, number 1, empirical if it passes both inter- and intrasubjectivity test. Number 2, fictitious if it does not pass both the tests. And number 3, theoretical based on the inter- and intrasubjective consensus of scientists. And that brings us to the end of this report. We hope that you learned and understood everything clearly, as these modules are the foundation for critical thinking ideas and principles that will help in comprehending more advanced concepts. We can now move on to the next modules.